Hello, my name is John Mungo, and I'm the host of today's Rye Brook Focus program. Today's guest is Detective Dan Bruno, a Rye Brook police officer who is the youth officer in the village. He's here to discuss the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program, otherwise known as D.A.R.E. Welcome, Detective Bruno.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right. Detective Bruno joined the NYPD in 2011 and then joined the Rye Brook Police Department in 2015. He became the Rye Brook D.A.R.E. officer at the end of 2018 and was promoted to detective in 2021. Detective Bruno, what attracted you to the role of youth officer, and was there any special training involved?
Yeah, so when I was in the NYPD Academy, I never really expected to be working with kids as a police officer or inside a classroom teaching kids. But, you know, I more expected to do something like emergency service unit or one of the other specialized units that the NYPD had, which is typical for new police officers. They want to do something that looks exciting or seems exciting. But when I transferred to Rye Brook, I was kind of unsure about where I wanted my career to go. And a position opened up for the D.A.R.E. officer. I didn't really know much about the program other than the D.A.R.E. officer at the time seemed to enjoy it. And I spoke to him about the position and he had nothing but good things to say about it. So I applied, I put in for it, and I was selected to be the department's D.A.R.E. officer. And that was really my first exposure to dealing with the youth in the community. Teaching D.A.R.E., it gave me a lot of experience dealing with kids, working with kids, particularly as a police officer. So that was kind of my base for the youth officer position. So once I got that feel for what it was like interacting with kids as a police officer, I knew that it was something that I really enjoyed and I wanted to go further with. So I was then selected as the department's youth officer. And to answer your question, yes, there was some training involved. So as one thing, as police officers, we're constantly being trained. There's different courses that come up that are available to us. And it's all in an effort to make us better to work with the public. So over the summer, I was certified as a basic juvenile officer, and I then took school resource officer training. I'm also trained in missing children, how to investigate missing children cases and child abductions. So that's kind of how I became the department's youth officer and the training that I was involved in.
Oh, okay. So the village implemented this program, the D.A.R.E. program, in around 1993, and it has been operated continuously or taught continuously since then. Hundreds of children have been informed by the program. Detective Bruno, what are the key objectives of the program, and what ages is the Rye Brook program aimed at?
Yeah, so the program itself, like you said, it started in Rye Brook in the early 90s. It was, and at that time, the program was very much a don't do drugs program. It was kind of telling kids like that, you know, drugs are bad. It was almost kind of preaching to kids not to do drugs. The curriculum changed in 2009. And it became less about don't do drugs and more about this is how you make good decisions. And that's a curriculum that I teach fifth graders at the Ridge Street School today. So we cover topics like alcohol, tobacco, peer pressure, stress, risks and consequences, bullying, and how to communicate confidently. So the program has definitely evolved from when it first started in Rye Brook to where it is now. And with the current curriculum, the main goal of the program is for students to learn how to make safe and responsible choices. So we do that using something called the D.A.R.E decision-making model, which gives students a guide as to how to make a decision when they're in a difficult situation.
Okay, let me get back to the curriculum in a second, but I mean, one of the aspects of the program that's interesting is that when it was started in Los Angeles years ago, there was a requirement that a uniformed, fully trained and qualified police officer be the instructor. What was the motivation for that? Or well, why is that important?
Yeah, so the best way to answer that question would be to look back at how the program started. So like you said, it was started in LA. It was started in 1983 by Chief Darrell Gates of the LAPD. And at that time, Chief Gates recognized that there was a problem in his community with youths abusing drugs. So as a chief of police, he said, well, what can I do to address this issue? And that's when he came up with the D.A.R.E program. So he was using what was available to him at the time, which was his officers, and he created the D.A.R.E program, and he put officers into schools, interacting with kids, interacting with the youth. And from there, it really took off and it became a nationwide program. So the reason for having a police officer in the classroom doing it is twofold. Of course, I'm in the schools to teach kids there and teach them how to make good decisions, but it's also about kids having positive interactions with the police so they don't grow up fearful of the police, and to let them know that the police are people who are there to help them. So there's definitely a community policing element to the D.A.R.E program.
Oh, it's interesting. Now, the National D.A.R.E program has a standard curriculum it uses called Keeping It Real. Is that the curriculum that is used in Rye Brook, or has it been modified? Or maybe you could tell us a little bit about the content of the instruction and how frequently the instruction takes place.
Yeah, so that curriculum, the Keeping It Real curriculum, is the curriculum that's used throughout the country now, and Rye Brook is no different. So the only modification to the curriculum that would be that I may add additional lessons for things like vaping or cyberbullying, which are very prevalent among kids these days, among youth, but they may not be included in the D.A.R.E curriculum. So I may add presentations based on what I feel that I see out in the world today. Like I said, cyberbullying is huge. So I may do a prevention course on that, or I may teach about vaping one course. And those are things that students are really interested in because they see it all the time. So they want to know how to deal with it and what they can do to prevent it, things like that. In terms of the actual curriculum, give me 1 second, I'm going to grab a book. So this is a planner that the students have, the fifth graders have at Ridge Street School. Each of them is given one of them. And inside of it, as I mentioned before, is something called the D.A.R.E decision-making model. And what that is it's a model that is intended to give kids the tools they need in order to make proper, safe, responsible decisions. So we start off by asking them to define a problem, to figure out what the problem is. The next step is for them to assess their choices, figure out what choices they have, whether they're good or bad choices. And then they have to respond. So they have to actually make a choice. They have to decide what they're going to do. And then the last part of the model is evaluate. So that's when they're supposed to look back at their decision and decide if it was a good decision or if it was a bad decision and what they would have done differently.
And this is all an open classroom discussion when they do that?
Yeah, that's correct. So just like a teacher would go in and teach their kids, I'm going into a classroom in the same manner, but really what I'm doing is I'm facilitating a discussion between myself and the students, and the students and other students.
Good. And how often do you interact in that formal way with the students?
So the current D.A.R.E program generally spans from January to May or June. So it's the second half of the school year. And on a 6-letter day schedule, I'm in there 5 days. So I'm in there 5 out of 6 days. So there's usually one day where I'm not in the school teaching, and the lessons are about 45 minutes long.
So that's 4 times a week for half a year is quite a number of visits.
Sure is.
I didn't realize it was that many. So, I've obviously worked in business for many years, and there were a lot of efforts to teach people how to make better decisions. It's not that easy to teach that. What kind of techniques do you use to try to get the kids to talk about a decision and think about what else could have been done?
So in the classroom, you can tell, or at least I can tell when I'm teaching, that the kids know the right decision to make, right? But that doesn't mean that they're always going to be making the right decision when they're out in the real world. And the reason for that is they may be experiencing things like peer pressure or stress or other outside circumstances that would lead them to not make a good decision. So one of the main things that I stress to the students is that you all know the right decision when you're in the classroom, but it may not be as easy to make a right decision out in the real world. So again, the D.A.R.E decision-making model, that's the model that we use in order to help them make good decisions. And I can give you an example of a situation that I would pose to them, and then they would have to figure out what to do in that situation. So
I think good, that'd be useful.
yeah, so this is it's a pretty basic situation. This is from the first lesson. All right, so this is just to start them off, get them thinking about how to make a difficult decision and what to do. So in the workbook, one of the first situations is you play on a soccer team. The team depends on you as goalkeeper. You are invited to your best friend's birthday party at the same time as the big game. You would have to miss the game to go to the party. How do you decide what to do? So it gives the students a conflict in which they have to decide. And as I said earlier, the D.A.R.E decision-making model, this is a situation where the students are supposed to get experience using the D.A.R.E decision-making model. So below that situation, it asks the students to define the problem, assess what their choices are, respond, so they have to make a choice, and then evaluate their decision and decide whether or not the choice that they made was appropriate.
Oh, great. And good. That sounds like a pretty effective approach for 5th graders.
Yes,
it's
for sure.
good example that they could relate to, and not particularly kind of an emotional example. So that's good.
Exactly.
Let me ask this. I noticed the D.A.R.E program in Rye Brook is targeted at 5th graders, but the D.A.R.E program nationally could run all the way up through high school. Do you know, is there some reason it's not continued, or do you have any idea of the background about why was it always focused on the 5th grade?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the 5th grade that's kind of when you want to get to the students and relay this information to them, because it's a good age where the students will still listen to a police officer, right? And they're going to be going into middle school the following year. So their program does have different curriculum for each grade. I mean, there's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, all the way up to high school. But generally, nationwide, 5th grade is kind of the main program that's taught. And it's been like that for a while. I actually went through the D.A.R.E program when I was in 5th grade. And I remember going through that program, not in Blind Brook, but where I grew up. And so that's how long. I mean, it hasn't changed in years, the fact that it's taught in 5th grade. But in Rye Brook, we in previous years, we also taught the 7th grade curriculum at the middle school. Recently there's been a scheduling conflict that hasn't allowed us to do that, but we're hoping to bring it back soon.
Interesting. So in addition to managing and teaching the D.A.R.E program, you're also the youth officer. What are there separate responsibilities for the youth officer?
Yeah, so as a youth officer in the department, I'm handling things like crimes that are committed by juveniles. I'm handling things like juveniles or youth who are victims of crimes, things like that. Now, we don't have a huge issue with that in Rye Brook, but juvenile law is very different than the regular penal law, which is why it usually takes a separate position in order to address things like that.
And as I was thinking, there's also a changing environment. And I mean, most obviously now, the legalization of marijuana that's coming. Does the school and maybe even the high school have assemblies where you as the youth officer would speak to the students about some of these issues and what they should be wary about?
We haven't had something like that, but I do work closely with the community coalition, who works closely with the parents of the community. And, I guess the main thing that I would say in regards to that is just because something's legal now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do, or the healthiest thing to do. And that, that would be the idea that I would relay to students if I were ever asked that question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Are there any final comments you'd like to make, or in summary, or?
I just want to thank you for your time. This has been really great. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You've been very, very informative. Appreciate it also. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.